The NFL season is officially here, and last night we were treated with an absolute banger of a match between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens. And with the Chiefs winning a 27-20 matchup with the Ravens, there have been a ton of conversations surrounding this Baltimore Ravens team and what their future looks like. So in today's video, I want to talk about the Baltimore Ravens and kind of give you guys an opinion on whether or not this Ravens team should really be panicking about their future. So the way this video is going to work is I am going to begin by just kind of briefly recapping what happened last night. We're going to go over some statistics, some general thoughts of the flow of the game, and some stuff like that. Then after that, we're going to talk about a bit of some analysis regarding the Ravens, what went well, what went wrong, and all that sort of stuff in between. And then at the very end of the video, I'll be answering the main question of the video, which is, should this Ravens team be panicking or are they in a good position? And per usual, everything is going to be timestamped in the timeline, so if you guys want to skip around throughout the video, feel free to, but I suggest just watching the full thing. And if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, but let's hop into the recap. So to sort of begin the recap, obviously both teams came out the gate playing really well offensively. The Chiefs had a really quick drive that resulted in an Xavier-worthy run touchdown. And of course, the Baltimore Ravens had a very solid first drive as well, as they were able to methodically move the ball down the field, relying on the run game with Lamar and Derrick Henry. And as the first half sort of unwinded, both offenses really couldn't sustain much long drives. The Chiefs were able to get 2 field goals in the second quarter, whereas the Ravens were only able to get really one good drive the entirety after that first touchdown drive. Both teams were able to move the ball fairly effectively, but once they got to like the 50-yard line or their own 40, they really struggled to move the ball past that, so both defenses played really well. But ultimately by halftime, this was a 13-10 game in favor of Kansas City, but for a team like Baltimore that had a turnover early in the game and really wasn't playing all that well offensively, I feel like they felt pretty good about where they were after the conclusion of the first half. So as they entered that second half, it looked like things might be able to go in the right direction, but unfortunately, it just really didn't work out that way. Kansas City would come out the gates, score a touchdown, and have a 20-10 lead after the end of the third quarter. Throughout the third quarter, Baltimore was able to get yards, but they were never really able to sustain long-term drives, which was sort of a continual thing that was affecting this Ravens team. Ultimately, though, it really was the fourth quarter where we got a lot of the fireworks of this game. Kansas City would score a touchdown, Baltimore would put up 10. Late in the game, with about 4 minutes left, the Chiefs got the ball with the Ravens only having 1 timeout. Ultimately, the Ravens were able to force a stop and have about 2 minutes with the ball left in the game to try to go down and put a game-winning touchdown up. But unfortunately, we all know how it went. Isaiah likely had one literal pinky toe out of bounds that forced this to end with a Chiefs victory. But ultimately speaking, I have a lot of thoughts on this game. Real quick before we get to the analysis, I think it's important we go over some statistics of the game for this Ravens team. On the day, Lamar Jackson had 273 yards passing the ball and 1 touchdown. He also led the team in rushing with 16 carries for 122. And when it comes to the receivers, Isaiah likely had his best game as a Baltimore Ravens with 9 catches for 111 yards and 1 touchdown. And had he had a pinky toe inbounds, he would have had a second touchdown plus like an additional 20 yards. Rashad Bateman, who was extremely quiet the entire game, did finish with 2 catches for 53. I think as the year goes on, you're going to want to see more from Rashad Bateman. Justice Hill had 6 catches, Zay Flowers had 6 catches, Mark Andrews only had 2. And when you look at the entire team statistics, the Ravens actually put up basically 100 more yards than this Chiefs team, with the Chiefs only having 350, whereas the Ravens had 450. They also had 4 more first downs and had a bit of a better third down efficiency. The one statistic that did go against the Ravens that actually did sort of impact them was the penalties. It wasn't a huge discrepancy, but there was definitely a bit of something there. For the penalties, the Ravens had 7 calls against them for 64 yards, whereas the Chiefs had 6 for 45. I know the refs have sort of been a point of controversy for a lot of Ravens fans, and while I agree with them, I also don't think it really impacted the game all that much, outside of the roughing the passer penalty that I thought was kind of a BS call. But when it comes to those like really stupid offensive tackle penalties they kept calling, it didn't impact the game, but it did feel incredibly unnecessary. I think that is such a stupid rule that just shouldn't be called at all. And I will say this, I thought that it was a bunch of BS that they were calling it only on the Ravens, when if you were actually watching the game, it looked like the Chiefs could have been called for it at least like 5 times. Regardless though, I don't think those penalties ultimately impacted the game, because I think I want to say 3 of those penalties were called on the first drive, which ultimately led to a Ravens touchdown, so it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But I can definitely understand if you were a little bit frustrated with it, because to be honest with you, as just a fan of the game, I was getting a little annoyed with it as well, because I think it's just a really dumb penalty. But now let's move on to more of the analysis section of the game. I had a bunch of notes I wrote while I was watching the game about what I was thinking with this Ravens game plan, because I thought out the gates, their game plan was really strong. They wanted to go downhill with their offensive line, with Derrick Henry, and of course Lamar Jackson's leg, and really target guys like Isaiah Likely and Zay Flowers. I thought that was a really good game plan. Ultimately, though, the way the Chiefs defense is, it didn't really allow that game plan to be much sustainable. As the game went on, the Ravens kind of went away from the run game. Derrick Henry only finished with like, I think 10-ish carries. In fact, he had 13 carries with a 3.5 average. So they really went away from Derrick Henry in the run game. And outside of Derrick Henry, the only other running back that received any sort of rushing attempts was Justice Hill, who only had 1. So on the day, there was only 14 rushes from a running back, whereas Lamar himself had 16. So after like the first couple drives of the game where they tried to sustain a run game, it wasn't too effective, but it was working well enough. They ultimately decided to pass the ball a lot more and rely on Lamar Jackson. And really the first note I wrote about this game after the game was over with was they cannot sustain this one bit. And that's not really a knock on Lamar or Harbaugh, because I felt like for this game, because it was a rematch of the AFC Championship game, because this is a really big week 1 matchup, you might want to run the ball a bit more with Lamar Jackson and play a brand of football that maybe you won't be doing the entire year. But if this Ravens team is going to continue to have the struggles they have offensively, they're going to have to rely on Lamar Jackson. And for Lamar to have over 10 carries a game where he's getting a bunch of contact and taking sacks and taking hits, that's not sustainable one bit. He's going to get injured, or he's going to really break down as the season goes along. So for this Ravens team, I think a really big part of this offense that has to get going is, number 1, they got to take more shots deep. They only really took like 3 the entire day. One of them should have been an interception, and one of them was a Rashad Bateman catch that ultimately led to that really big play that almost won the game. And I also think they have to find a way to establish a more dominant run game with Derrick Henry. I know the offensive line wasn't creating a ton of gaps, but I felt like there was enough there to continue to run the ball with Derrick Henry that they really didn't go down a whole bunch this game, especially later in the second half. It really felt like they were abandoning the run game in order to go all out to win this game, with Lamar Jackson kind of carrying the team. And while I understand why they did that in this game, I really hope as the year goes on, they rely a bit more on Derrick Henry and Justice Hill and some of the other running backs, and not necessarily so much on Lamar Jackson. Now, all that being said, I understand why they did it in this game. This was a game where you're going up against the defending champions. This is a rematch, revenge game. I understand why you'd kind of want to go all out with Lamar Jackson, but I don't think that's very sustainable, and I think long term you're definitely going to want to find more ways to get the ball out of Lamar's hand so that he doesn't take a whole bunch of contact as the year goes on. Kind of connecting with that was my second main point that I took away from this game. That offensive line needs a lot of work. Right now, I thought the left side of the offensive line with Stanley, Linderbaum, and Voorhees was pretty solid, but that right side of the offensive line was just really bad the entire day. They were having a rotation of different tackles throughout the game, whether it was Rosengarten or Makari, and that was just a revolving door for Chris Jones to get instant pressures on the quarterback. And I think long term, that's definitely going to be something that they're going to have to look at, what they can do to kind of help out the right side of the offensive line. I also thought, on the same note, the right guard really struggled throughout the game. I didn't think he played all that well. I will say I think he was better than the tackle, but it was just a really bad look for the right side of the offensive line. Granted, you are going up against Chris Jones and George Karlaftis and those great defensive linemen, so it wasn't like it was an easy matchup. But when you're talking about a team that has the Dallas Cowboys, I believe, in week 3, the Cleveland Browns in a couple weeks with Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Trey Hendrickson, and all these great edge rushers, it's really going to be hard for Lamar Jackson to find success within the pocket if that right side is constantly giving up pressures to those great edge rushers. As the year progresses, I want to see more from this offensive line because they really struggled, especially on the right side. Not to mention, they really weren't able to run the ball that effectively. Again, Chris Jones is in the middle. They got some good defensive linemen, so I get it. Not to mention, Nick Bolton and those linebackers are incredible. But I do want to see this team be more successful with the run game so that you can take some of the stuff off the plate of Lamar Jackson. So for me, that really comes down to the offensive line performing at a higher level. The last note I have for this Ravens team offensively is that Zay Flowers and Isaiah Likely need to be featured the entire season. I thought Isaiah Likely looked incredible incredible in this game. He clearly looks like the better tight end currently than Mark Andrews. So as the year goes on, I want to see Isaiah Likely continue to get targeted over 5 times a game and hopefully average like 50 to 60 yards per game. Unlike Mark Andrews, he still has a bunch of juice in him. He can win 50-50 balls. He's got good solid hands. He's good after the run. Mark Andrews just doesn't quite have that anymore. Mark Andrews is a savvy veteran who can still block at a better level than Isaiah Likely, but I think as a receiving threat, Isaiah needs the bulk of the work from the tight end room. And then for Zay Flowers, he only had 6 catches for 37 yards. I think they need to use him a little bit more downfield, use his speed, use his run after the catch ability, because I think there's a bit more you can tap into with Zay Flowers. Speaking of down the field ability, I think Rashad Bateman needs more opportunities. He only had 2 catches, didn't get a ton of separation when he was out there. I need to see more from Bateman for this past game because outside of Zay Flowers and Isaiah Likely, there really wasn't a whole lot there. And the last little note I have about this Ravens team, this goes to the defense. I thought the defense was really solid. They were able to continue to get pressure on Patrick Mahomes. They had multiple sacks. They obviously forced an interception. That was a really good play. But I will say there was one continuous issue that happened throughout the game with this defense covering Rashee Rice and that slot receiver position that I thought was really bizarre. Typically, you're going to put a fast linebacker or a hybrid safety such as a Kyle Hamilton typically on the slot receiver because they can usually match up better than like a big bulky Roquan Smith type of linebacker. Granted, this is a game where the Chiefs do have Kelsey, so typically you're going to want to put your hybrid or fast linebacker on Kelsey. But in this game where that slot receiver was continuing to kill you with these easy option routes, I was really shocked that they continued to put their linebackers like Roquan and some of these other guys on Rashee Rice when you have a guy like a Kyle Hamilton who's really good at covering those players. It was a small note of the game that didn't ultimately come back to bite them, but it felt like whenever the Chiefs needed a first down or wanted to get a big play, they would just go to this slot receiver Rashee Rice option route where he had a chance to go outside or inside depending on the leverage of the linebacker. And usually when he would get that inside leverage, he would take the slant and take that thing for like 15 plus yards, and it felt like basically an instant first down. Again, it didn't ultimately kill this Ravens defense, but I thought it was a really bizarre tactic from Zach Orr, and I really would have liked to have seen him game plan a new scheme to have Kyle Hamilton switch from Kelsey or whoever he was going up against to trying to stay with that slot receiver a little bit more often because that play was just killing them the entire night. But other than that, I thought the defense looked really good. For this being Zach Orr's first defensive coordinating game, I thought he had a really good showcase of what he can do. Defensively, there were some things that need to be cleaned up, but you held a really good team to 27 points and gave your offense the ball late in the game to go win the game. So I think they played a really fine game and did their job. But now to answer the question of this game, should the Ravens really be panicking? Should they be fearful of this Chiefs team? Have they, or if they were to meet again in the playoffs? And to be honest with you, I think they should be a little bit concerned. Maybe not panicking, but maybe a little bit concerned. And my reasoning from that is that regardless of the outcome of the game, even if Baltimore was able to score that touchdown, and even if they got that 2-point conversion that it looked like they were going to do, I would still feel as if this Ravens team had a lot more questions to answer than this Chiefs team. This Chiefs team is freaking awesome and played a really solid game, but there's obviously a bunch of room for improvement from this team. Whereas for the Ravens, it felt like they put forth a really solid effort, but the offensive line is very suspect. The defense still has some question marks that need to be answered, and the receiving core is very lackluster outside of Zay Flowers and Isaiah Likely. Not to mention, Derrick Henry only had 13 carries and didn't look all that good when he was running the football. Whereas for the Chiefs, they played their brand of football. I feel like this team, whether they won or lost, would feel pretty okay with what ended up happening during the game. So regardless of who actually would have won the matchup, I feel as if a Ravens fan would still feel very worried about the future because of all the things that happened in this game that aren't sustainable or potentially can't be improved upon. So while yes, the Ravens hypothetically could play this exact same game in the playoffs and win this one, I still feel as if there was a lot of question marks that did pop up from this game. So should they be panicking? No, because you still have Lamar, you still have a good coach, you still have a pretty solid team all around and a fantastic defense. So no, you shouldn't be panicking. But should you be a little concerned? Probably. There's a lot of things that I think need to be worked on, which fortunately for this Ravens team, they're going to have a lot of time to try and improve upon this. But with that said, they have a tough schedule and a lot of interesting matchups ahead, so we'll just have to wait and see. But if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.